Hello everyone, we are continuing with our series titled Studies in the Book of Proverbs. And in this particular video, we are going to talk about instructions to parents. Now, I need to accept in the very beginning that there is no direct instruction given to parents about children. Of course, this book is full of instructions for children and how they need to relate to parents. And we're going to talk about that in the next video. But definitely, there is a lot of wisdom that can be gleaned from this book that Solomon is trying to provide us as to how parents are to instruct their children, how they are to teach their children. Now, this video is going to be divided into 4 sections. Section 1 is where we look at Proverbs 1 to 7, and I want to point out to us that these chapters are actually advice given by a father to a son. Section 2, we are going to talk about what parents need to know about children. Now, this section is going to discuss the underlying assumptions that are there about children in the book of Proverbs. Section 3 is going to talk about what are parents to instruct their children about. And number 4, we are going to talk about parents disciplining children, the necessity of that kind of discipline. So let's begin with section 1, where we are going to talk about Proverbs 1 through 7, in which these are chapters where a father is advising a son. Now, the book of Proverbs is a book of wisdom, and I want to argue that wisdom begins at home. It is the duty and the responsibility of parents to teach their children wisdom. And there are at least 15 passages in the first 7 chapters of the book of Proverbs, which begin with, "My son." In other words, the father is calling out to his son or to his sons and is providing them with valuable advice. Now, we don't have the time to look into all these 15 passages, so let me try and bring your attention to 5 of those. Chapter 1, verse 8 begins like this: "Listen, my son, to your father's instruction, and do not forsake your mother's teaching." So chapter 1 verse 8, in the very beginning of the book, we are told that a father is to instruct his son and a mother is supposed to teach their children. And so chapter 1 verse 8, "My son" passage. Chapter 1 verse 10, "My son, if sinful men entice you, do not give in to them." Again, this is a father instructing a son. "My son, this is going to be a possibility in the future, and therefore I am warning you ahead of what is going to come." Chapter 2, verse 1, "My son," again, it's a father speaking to a son, "My son, if you accept my words and store up my commands within you," and then he goes on to give many instructions that he wants to teach his son. Chapter 3, verse 1, "My son, do not forget my teaching, but keep my commands in your heart." Again, this is a father speaking to a son. Chapter 3, verse 11, "My son, do not despise the Lord's discipline and do not resent his rebuke." I have brought 5 examples. There are 15 examples of this kind in which the father is advising the son about particular topics, and he begins with, "My son." And so what's the whole point? The whole point is that the book of Proverbs teaches us that it is the duty of the parents to teach and instruct their children in matters of wisdom. Wisdom begins at home. We get into section 2, where we are going to talk about what parents need to know about children. In other words, we are going to talk about the underlying assumptions about children in the book of Proverbs. And again, there are several things to be discussed in this section, but we're going to limit ourselves to 3 things. Number 1, children are simple and naive, primarily because of their inexperience. And therefore, children are vulnerable to solicitations and temptations of evil people. Let me repeat that. Children are simple and naive because of their inexperience, and therefore they are vulnerable to solicitations and temptations of evil people. Due to their inexperience and naivety, children tend to think the best of everyone, even wicked people, and therefore they can be taken advantage of by evil people. Because children do not know to distinguish between a good person and a bad person, it is easier for the bad person to tempt a child. And therefore, it is the duty and the responsibility of a parent to vaccinate the child with advice and wisdom, such that when these temptations come from wicked people, the children would be fully equipped to know that this is a bad kind of thing and I must not engage in this kind of a situation. For example, parents are to instruct their children about bad company. In chapter 1, we are talking about, and we would discuss this in greater detail later, but I just want to mention that a father is giving advice to his son that there would be bad people who pressurize you to join hands with them in doing evil things, but do not give in to that kind of peer pressure. Or the father is instructing the son in later chapters in this first 7 chapters that there would be temptations concerning sexuality that come into your presence, but there are dangers involved. This is how you avoid it. So the assumption number 1 is that children are naive and simple because of their inexperience, and therefore they are vulnerable to the solicitations and temptations of wicked people. Assumption number 2, children are usually shallow in their thinking, and therefore parents need to give them depth in their thinking. So children, again, because of their inexperience, are shallow, and the parents need to add depth to their thinking. There are several things that we could point out in this regard here, but I'm going to point out one particular thing, that the book of Proverbs throughout is instructing not just children but older people as well about riches. Now let me bring to our attention first a verse from the book of Proverbs chapter 13 verse 7, where we are instructed to not judge a person by outward appearances, because it says one person pretends to be rich yet has nothing, another pretends to be poor yet has great wealth. In other words, the poor person wants to portray himself as a rich person in front of the other people. He wants to be seen in a particular way. He wants to show himself in a particular way. But the rich person does not see any need to flaunt his wealth. And children, because they are shallow in their thinking, need to be told that there is more depth to wealth than is seen on the surface. Chapter 15 verse 6. Now children are usually interested in getting rich very soon and very fast, and therefore they think any method adopted to becoming rich is a good idea. But chapter 15 verse 6 instructs us, the house of the righteous contains great treasure, but the income of the wicked brings ruin. In other words, the righteous people could be rich, but if you gain income, if you bring in wealth through wicked means, it would ultimately bring you ruin. Look at the depth that is brought by the parents in their instruction to children about wealth. The same chapter, chapter 15, verses 16 and 17. We are told there, better a little with the fear of the Lord than great wealth with turmoil. Better a small serving of vegetables with love than a fattened calf with hatred. Again, the children are shallow in their thinking. And here is instruction concerning depth to their thinking. They are told that some things are better than other things. For example, even if you have little, if it is combined with the fear of the Lord, it is better than having great wealth and great turmoil attached to it. So children would actually prefer to have great wealth than little, but Solomon, the provider of wisdom in this book, is trying to tell everyone that a little combined with the fear of the Lord is better than great wealth combined with turmoil. Similarly, better a small serving of vegetables with love than a fattened calf with hatred. Now, if you ask a child, would you like to have a plate of vegetables or a plate which has the meat of fattened calf, they would choose one over the other. Solomon is trying to tell us here, though, that if the plate of small vegetables come with love, and if the plate with the fattened calf comes with hatred, the plate of vegetables is better than the plate with the fattened meat. In other words, there are some things that are more important than abundance, more important than wealth. And thus, depth is being added to the thinking of not just children, but also older people. Assumption number 3 about children. Children often fail to see the value of parental advice and discipline, and therefore they often do not want to listen to the advice of parents and their father and their mother. Proverbs chapter 1 verses 8 to 9 tells us this: "Listen, my son, to your father's instruction. Do not forsake your mother's teaching. They are a garland to grace your head and a chain to adorn your neck." In other words, both parents and children are being told that parental advice will adorn the child. In other words, it would bring them emotional adornment, it would bring them mental beauty, character formation, personality formation, and so on. So both children and parents are told that parental advice is important. Let me take you to chapter 5 and read verse 7 and then some other verses as well. Chapter 5 verse 7. "Now then, my sons, listen to me. Do not turn aside from what I say." Because it is easy for children to disregard parental advice, to disregard parental discipline, and therefore the parent has to say, "Listen to me. Do not turn aside from what I say." And the parent is also instructed to instruct the children, to tell them the consequences of what would happen if they were to stray from the path of the Lord. Verses 11 to 13. "At the end of your life, you will groan. When your flesh and body are spent, you will say, 'How I hated discipline, how my heart spurned correction. I would not obey my teachers or turn my ear to my instructors.'" So the parents are to advise their children by saying that if you do not listen to parental advice and instructions, at the end of the life, there would be great remorse, there would be great regret, and you would say, "Oh, how I hated discipline when I was young, and how my heart spurned correction, and look at the pathetic situation that I am in right now." And with that, I conclude section 2, where we were discussing some of the underlying assumptions about children in the book of Proverbs. Section 3, what are parents to instruct their children about? Number 1, parents are to instruct their children about bad company. Again, there are several instructions that are being given in the book of Proverbs. We do not have the time to cover them all, but I'm going to point out or highlight a few of them. Chapter 1, verse 10 following. This is parental advice concerning peer pressure. This is parental advice concerning bad company and bad friendship. This is parental advice about how temptations can be brought to them and how they are to forsake those temptations and how they are to keep themselves safe. Let me read from verse 10 onwards. "My son, if sinful men entice you, do not give in to them." In other words, sinful men would definitely come and they would try to trap you, they would try to entice you, they would try to seduce you, but you should have the willpower, the strength of character to say no to them. If they say, "Come along with us, let's lie in wait for innocent blood, let's ambush some harmless soul, let's swallow them alive like the grave and whole like those who go down to the pit." Now, here is what these evil men are asking this young person who is inexperienced to come and join with them in stealing and even in killing people. Why would they do that? Look at the promises that are being made, the glittering promises of sin. They say, if we kill, if we steal, we will get all sorts of valuable things and fill our houses with plunder. Cast lots with us. We will all share the loot. In other words, 4 people coming to a young person and saying, if we are a group of 5, we would be more effective. And once we have all these valuables, we will distribute it equally amongst all of us. And thus the promise of glittering sin. Verse 15, but the father is advising, he says, my son, do not go along with them. Do not set foot on their paths, for their feet rush into evil. They are swift to shed blood. How useless to spread a net where every bird can see it. These men lie in wait for their own blood. They ambush only themselves. Such are the paths of all who go after ill-gotten gain. It takes away the life of those who get it. In other words, these are people who are going to trap themselves. They're ambushing only themselves. Ill-gotten wealth will always result in destruction and ruin. And so, my young son, do not fall for the temptations that come from these kinds of people. Look at how the parent is trying to vaccinate the child against peer pressure, especially the pressure that come from evil men, wicked persons, and so those kinds of instructions. Number 2, Proverbs chapters 2 and 3, the father is instructing the son with a lot of instructions concerning God and the relationship with God. Chapter 2, verse 5, the father is instructing the son and he says, then you will understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God. In other words, for a parent, it is important that his son or daughter understand the fear of the Lord and understand the wisdom of God. And therefore, they are asking their children to pursue that. Verse 6, the father is instructing the son by saying that God is the source of wisdom, knowledge, and understanding. For the Lord gives wisdom, from his mouth come knowledge and understanding. In other words, young man, young woman, if you want knowledge and understanding and wisdom, it is God who gives you those things. Therefore, turn to God. Look at the role that parents play in guiding children in their understanding about God and their relationship with God. Verses 7 and 8. God is the giver of success and he is the protector of the righteous. He holds success in store for the upright. He is a shield to those whose walk is blameless, for he guards the course of the just and protects the way of his faithful ones. In other words, the father is instructing the son. The parents are to instruct their children that success ultimately comes from God. Security and protection in life also ultimately come from God. Chapter 3, 5 and 6. The father is instructing the son, trust in the Lord, submit to him. Chapter 3, 5 and 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him and he will make your paths straight. Who is speaking to whom? The father is speaking to the son. The parent is speaking to his or her child and is telling them to trust in the Lord, to submit to him. Chapter 3, verse 9 and 10. Honor the Lord with your wealth, with the first fruits of all your crops. Then your barns will be filled to overflowing, and your vats will brim over with new wine. Again, who is talking to whom? The father is talking to the son. And the father is saying that when you have wealth, when you make money, learn to honor the Lord with your wealth, with the first fruits of all your crops. And if you do that, if you honor the Lord by sharing of your wealth, then God would also honor you, is what is being told here. Number 3, the parents are also vaccinating their children. They're instructing their children about sexual purity. In fact, a lot of portion in the first 7 chapters, chapter 5 and chapter 7 entirely, and there are verses in chapter 2 and verses in chapter 6 that are focused on this topic. I have done 3 videos on this topic, and therefore I will not get into that right now. This brings us to section 4, where we are talking about disciplining children. Parents are told that it is important to discipline children. Of course, we are not to discipline them in anger. We are not to discipline them in harshness. We are to discipline them with love and they're good in our mind, but the fact that parents are told to discipline their children is repeated time and again in the book of Proverbs. Chapter 13, verse 24. Whoever spares the rod hates their children, but the one who loves their children is careful to discipline them. So if you love your child, discipline your child. If you're not disciplining your child, you're actually hating your child, is what Solomon is telling us here. We go to Proverbs chapter 19 and look at verse 18. It says, discipline your children, for in that there is hope. Do not be a willing party to their death. In other words, if you do not discipline your child, parents, it would ultimately lead to the destruction and death of your child. And therefore, we must not be absent parents or absent fathers or absent mothers. We must be present with them in disciplining our children, because that would give us hope concerning their future. Chapter 22, verses 6 and then verse 15. Verse 6, start children off on the way they should go, and even when they are old, they will not turn from it. In other words, don't think that the children are too small to instruct them. Start them when they are young and create habits, create patterns in them, create a love for God's word, a love for God himself, such that even when they are old, they would not depart from it. Verse 15, folly is bound up in the heart of a child, but the rod of discipline will drive it far away. Look at another assumption concerning children in the book of Proverbs. Folly is bound up in the heart of a child, but the rod of discipline will drive it far away. Chapter 23, verses 13 and 14. Do not withhold discipline from a child. If you punish them with the rod, they will not die. Punish them with the rod and save them from death. Now, again, we are to remember that the book of Proverbs was written 3,000 years before today, and therefore it was a different culture, and the rod and spanking was very much part of disciplining children. We don't have to necessarily use the rod. We may not have to use the rod at all, but it's important for us to discipline our children. If we discipline them, they're not going to die. We are actually going to save them from death. Let me bring one final chapter to our attention, chapter 29, verses 15 and 17 as well. A rod and a reprimand impart wisdom, but a child left undisciplined disgraces its mother. In other words, the parents are told that if you discipline your child, you are imparting wisdom into your child. But if a child is left undisciplined, the child would disgrace its mother and its father. Verse 17 as well. Discipline your children and they will give you peace. They will bring you the delights you desire. In other words, if you discipline your child when they are young, when they grow up, you would be able to delight in them. They will not be a disgrace to you. They will not be bringing shame and destruction and death upon themselves, but they would be able to live a fruitful life. And with that, I conclude our discussion on instruction to parents. We discussed 4 things. Number 1, we discussed the chapters 1 through 7 are actually pieces of advice that are given by a father to a son. Number 2, we talked about some underlying assumptions about children in the book of Proverbs. Number 3, we looked at what the parents are to instruct their children about: bad friendship, relationship with God, sexual purity, and there are many other things that could be discussed, but we did not do that because of lack of time. I hope this kind of creates an appetite in you to go back to the book of Proverbs and read this for yourself if you are a parent. And number 4 speaks also about the need for disciplining children. Thank you so much. God bless you. We will come back with another video from the book of Proverbs with instruction for children. Until then, God bless.